The grand ballroom fell into a suffocating silence as Claire Hayes stood frozen in her white dress, watching her groom, Kevin, slip a ring onto another woman's finger. Not a stranger, her own sister, Zoe. "I can't marry you," Kevin said, his voice cold. "Zoe is the one I love." Gasps rippled through the guests. iPhones turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. Claire's hands trembled. But what shattered her wasn't him. It was her mother looking away, her stepfather nodding in quiet approval, and her sister. Her sister was smiling. In that moment, Claire realized the truth. This betrayal had been planned long before she walked down the aisle.
Before we go on, tell me honestly, if you were Claire, would you walk away with your dignity or fight back right there in front of everyone? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you love emotional, powerful stories filled with shocking twists, justice, and healing, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me.
The whispers hadn't even settled when Beatrice Hayes grabbed Claire's wrist and pulled her away from the altar. "Don't make a scene," her mother hissed under her breath, her painted smile still frozen for the watching guests. "You've embarrassed this family enough." Claire stumbled, her heels catching on the marble floor. Her veil dragged behind her like something already discarded. Behind them, a soft, poisonous laugh rose from the crowd. It wasn't just humiliation. It was erasure. Within minutes, the wedding that was supposed to celebrate her love had rewritten itself without her. Kevin stood proudly beside Zoe, his arm now wrapped around her waist like it had always belonged there. Guests were already shifting their attention, their cameras, their admiration. Claire felt like she had been edited out of her own life. "Why?" she finally whispered, her voice shaking as her mother dragged her into a quiet corridor behind the ballroom. "Why didn't you tell me?" Beatrice didn't look at her. "Because it would have caused trouble," she said flatly. "And we needed this marriage." "We?" Claire's breath hitched. "You mean you needed it?" Her stepfather, Robert Price, stepped in, his expression hard. "This isn't the time for emotions, Claire," he snapped. "The Kensingtons are already here. If we don't fix this now, we lose everything." Claire blinked, confusion slicing through her pain. "The Kensingtons?" Robert nodded sharply. "Elijah Kensington, the CEO. He has agreed to step in." The words didn't make sense at first. "Step in," she repeated. Her mother finally turned to her, her eyes cold with urgency. "You will marry him. Today." The corridor seemed to tilt. Claire stared at them, waiting for the joke. It never came. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice barely audible. He just... "Yes," Robert cut her off. "You were humiliated. That is exactly why we must act quickly before the scandal spreads." "So I'm just a replacement." Claire's lips trembled. "A solution to your problem." "You are our daughter," Beatrice said. But there was no warmth in her tone. "And your duty is to protect this family." Protect? The word felt like a knife. Claire let out a hollow laugh. "Did this family protect me?" That was her answer. Outside, the music had resumed, faint, distorted, as if mocking her. Somewhere in that hall, her sister was probably already celebrating. And here she was, being traded. "Who is he?" Claire asked finally, her voice quieter now, not broken, just emptied. "Elijah Kensington," Robert repeated. "Head of Kensington Holdings, one of the most powerful men in the country." "And why would someone like that agree to marry me?" she asked. Her mother hesitated. That hesitation was everything. "They say," Beatrice began carefully, "he's not like other men." Claire frowned. "What does that mean?" Robert exhaled impatiently. "He's in a wheelchair, has been for years, doesn't care for women, Doesn't care for anything, really. Claire felt a strange chill crawl up her spine. So, you're marrying me off to a man who doesn't even want a wife. Exactly, Robert said. No emotional complications, no expectations. It's perfect. Perfect! Claire almost laughed again, but the sound died in her throat. A loveless marriage, a transaction, a life decided in a hallway. And yet something didn't sit right. Why me? She asked again, more sharply this time. He could choose anyone. Robert and Beatrice exchanged a glance. Another hesitation. Another truth they didn't want to say. Because, Beatrice said slowly, you're convenient. The word hit harder than the betrayal at the altar. Convenient. Not loved, not chosen, just available. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Her heart felt like it had been shattered so completely that there was nothing left to break. Maybe that was why she felt so calm. Where is he? She asked. Robert blinked, surprised. You're agreeing? Claire opened her eyes. There was no fire in them now, no tears, just something quiet, something dangerous. What choice do I have? That was enough for them. Within minutes, everything moved with terrifying speed. The decorations were subtly rearranged. The officiant was quietly informed. Guests were told there had been a change of plans. No one asked about Claire. No one cared. She was led to a private room to prepare, though there was nothing left to prepare for. The same dress, the same makeup, the same shattered girl. Only the groom had changed. A soft knock came at the door. Before she could answer, it opened. A man stepped inside, tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit. Behind him, a wheelchair, and seated in it, Elijah Kensington. Claire's breath caught. He was younger than she expected, early 30s perhaps. His face was sharp, striking, not the face of a man broken by life, but one carved by control. His eyes met hers, dark, unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he tilted his head slightly, studying her. You're Claire, he said. His voice was calm, low, controlled. Not unkind, just distant. Yes, she replied softly. Another pause. You understand what this is? He asked. She swallowed. A marriage to save face. His lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Good, he said. At least we won't waste time pretending. The bluntness should have hurt. But strangely, it didn't. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to her all day. Do you object? He asked. The question surprised her. Object? Did she have that right? Claire looked at him carefully now, at the way his hands rested on the armrests, steady, controlled, at the way his posture remained perfectly upright, at the way his gaze didn't pity her, didn't mock her, didn't want anything from her. For the first time since the ceremony began, she felt seen. Not as a bride, not as a failure, just as herself. No, she said quietly. I don't object. Another silence. This one felt different, measured, calculated. Elijah nodded once. Then let's not keep them waiting, as his assistant stepped forward to wheel him out. Claire followed. Each step felt unreal, like she was walking through someone else's story. Back into the hall, back into the whispers, back into the eyes that had already judged her. But this time they weren't looking at her with pity. They were looking with curiosity. Because now she wasn't the abandoned bride anymore. She was the woman about to marry Elijah Kensington. As she reached the altar again, she couldn't help but glance to the side. Kevin and Zoe, standing together, watching. Zoe's smile faltered for just a second. Kevin's brows furrowed. Confusion. Doubt. Good. For the first time that day, Claire felt something shift. Not victory, not yet, but something close to it. The officiant cleared his throat nervously. We are gathered here today." The words blurred together. Claire barely heard them. Her focus was on the man beside her, on the quiet strength in his presence, on the strange feeling settling in her chest. This wasn't love, it wasn't hope, it wasn't even trust. But it was different. And as Elijah reached for her hand, his fingers brushed against hers. Warm, firm, real. And in that fleeting contact, a thought crossed Claire's mind. A dangerous one. What if this marriage wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of something no one saw coming? The Kensington estate did not feel like a home. It felt like a place where secrets were buried, deep beneath polished marble and quiet obedience. From the moment Claire stepped through the towering iron gates, she sensed it, the invisible weight pressing down on everything. The guards stood too straight. The staff moved too carefully. Even the wind through the tall oak trees seemed restrained. Nothing here was natural. Everything was controlled. And at the center of it all, Elijah Kensington. Claire sat in silence in the back of the sleek black sedan as it rolled to a stop in front of the mansion. The building rose before her like a monument. Grand, cold, untouchable. "Welcome home, ma'am," Leo, the assistant, said gently as he opened the door for her. "Der home." The word felt foreign. Claire stepped out slowly, her heels echoing against the stone as she looked up at the structure. She had never imagined her life would lead here. Not like this. Not after what had happened just hours ago. Behind her, the soft mechanical sound of the wheelchair followed. Elijah. She turned slightly, watching as Leo carefully guided him out of the car. But what struck her wasn't the chair. It was Elijah himself. Even seated, he carried a presence that didn't diminish. If anything, it intensified. His gaze swept over the estate once, sharp, assessing, before shifting briefly to her. "Come," he said simply. No welcome, no comfort, just instruction. Claire nodded and followed. Inside, the mansion was even more overwhelming. High ceilings, intricate carvings, warm golden lighting. Everything screamed wealth and power. But beneath it all there was something else. Distance. Coldness. This was not a place built for warmth. It was built for control. "Ma'am," a group of staff greeted in unison, bowing slightly as she entered. The sudden attention made her tense. She wasn't used to this. Not this kind of respect. Not this kind of silence. Elijah didn't acknowledge them. He simply moved forward, and they parted like water. Claire followed closely behind, unsure where she was being led. Eventually, they reached a wide corridor lined with doors. Elijah stopped. "This wing is yours," he said. Claire blinked. "Mine?" "Yes." He gestured slightly. "Bedroom, sitting room, dressing area. Everything you need is here." She looked at the doors, then back at him. "And you?" she asked hesitantly. "My quarters are separate." The answer came too quickly, too clean. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. "We are married," she said softly. Elijah's eyes flickered, just for a second. "Yes," he replied. "On paper." The words landed heavier than she expected. Of course. This wasn't a real marriage. It was a contract, a solution, a mask. "Is that how you want it?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Elijah held her gaze. There was something unreadable there, something he wasn't saying. "It's how it has to be," he said finally. "Not want, not choice, necessity." That distinction didn't escape her. Before she could ask anything else, another voice interrupted. "Well, well, so this is the new bride." Claire turned. A woman stood at the end of the corridor. Elegant, poised, her eyes sharp with interest. Aunt Sarah Kensington. Even without an introduction, Claire knew. There was something in the way she carried herself, the subtle authority, the faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sarah continued walking toward them, her heels clicking softly. "You didn't tell me she'd be this young." Her gaze moved over Claire slowly, assessing, judging, dismissing. Claire straightened instinctively. "I'm Claire," she said politely. Sarah smiled faintly. "Of course you are." But the way she said it, it wasn't acceptance. It was calculation. "Elijah has always made unconventional decisions," Sarah added, glancing briefly at the wheelchair before returning her gaze to Claire. "I suppose this is another one." Claire felt the sting beneath the words. Before she could respond, Elijah spoke. "That will be all, Aunt Sarah." His tone was calm but firm, a warning. Sarah's smile thinned. "Of course," she said lightly. "We'll talk later." She turned and walked away, but not before giving Claire one last look. A look that said, "You don't belong here." The silence she left behind felt heavier than before. Claire exhaled slowly. "Does everyone here speak like that?" she asked quietly. Elijah didn't answer immediately. "They speak according to what they believe they can get away with," he said finally. The words lingered. There was more meaning in them than he was saying. Claire studied him again. He wasn't just a distant man. He was a man surrounded by something dangerous. "Rest," Elijah added, turning slightly. "You'll need it." And just like that, he was gone, Leo guiding him down another corridor, leaving her standing alone in a wing that suddenly felt far too large. Hours passed. Claire didn't remember lying down, but at some point, exhaustion overtook her. When she woke, the room was dim, quiet, too quiet. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came back. The wedding, the betrayal, the marriage, Elijah. She sat up slowly, her head aching. Something felt off. A faint sound. She froze. There it was again. Soft, measured, like footsteps coming from the hallway. Her breath caught. That didn't make sense. The staff would announce themselves, and Elijah, he couldn't walk. Could he? Claire slipped out of bed carefully, her bare feet silent against the floor. The door to her room was slightly ajar. She hadn't left it that way. A thin line of darkness stretched across the floor from the hallway beyond. The sound came again, closer. This time her heart began to pound. This wasn't imagination. Someone was out there and they weren't supposed to be. Slowly, she moved toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her hand reached for the handle, paused. Then she pulled it open. The hallway stretched before her, empty, silent. But something had changed. The air felt disturbed, like someone had just been there. Her eyes moved down the corridor to the far end, where the shadows were thickest, and for a split second, she saw it. A figure, tall, standing still. Her breath stopped. Elijah. No, that couldn't be, because the next second, the figure moved. Not rolled, not shifted, moved. A step, clear, undeniable. Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. Elijah, she whispered. The name barely left her lips, and the lights flickered on. Bright, blinding. The hallway snapped into clarity, empty. No figure, no movement, nothing. Claire blinked rapidly, her chest rising and falling. Was she imagining things? Had the stress finally broken her? Or had she just seen something she wasn't supposed to see? From somewhere deeper in the mansion, she heard the faint sound of wheels. A wheelchair approaching. Her pulse quickened. Seconds later, Elijah appeared at the far end of the corridor, seated, calm, exactly as he had been before. His gaze lifted, met hers, and for the briefest moment something passed between them. Not surprise, not confusion, something else, something dangerous, something like a secret. Claire did not sleep again that night. She lay still beneath the expensive sheets, staring into the darkness, while the image replayed in her mind over and over again. A tall figure in the hallway, standing, moving. Not imagined, not dreamed, seen. And then, seconds later, Elijah had appeared in his wheelchair, as if nothing had happened. By dawn, her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her thoughts were sharper than ever. Something was wrong in this house, something carefully hidden. And for the first time since the forced marriage, the numbness that had wrapped itself around her heart began to loosen. Not because she felt safe, but because she felt alert. The kind of alertness that came when a person realized pain was no longer the only danger in the room. She rose early, dressed simply, and stepped out into the corridor before the household fully awakened. Pale morning light filtered through the tall windows, brushing the walls with gold. In daylight, the mansion looked less like a prison and more like a museum. Beautiful, silent, untouchable. But Claire had grown up around smiling lies. She knew how to recognize a place that was pretending. A maid appeared at the end of the hall carrying a tray of fresh flowers. She lowered her head the instant she saw Claire. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning," Claire replied gently. The young woman hesitated, as if surprised by the kindness. "I was told to ask whether you would prefer tea or coffee in your breakfast room," she said. "My breakfast room?" Everything in this house seemed designed to remind Claire that wealth could soften cruelty without ever removing it. "Tea, please," she said. The maid nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Before the girl could leave, Claire asked, "Did you work here last night?" The maid stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, ma'am." "Did you see anyone walking through this corridor after midnight?" The tray trembled in the girl's hands. Only slightly, but enough. "No, ma'am." The answer came too fast, too rehearsed. Claire held her gaze for a beat longer. The maid kept her eyes down. "Thank you," Claire said. The girl hurried away. Claire watched her disappear and felt a cold certainty settle deeper inside her. Whatever secret existed in this house, the staff knew enough to fear it. She turned toward the staircase, moving slowly, pretending she had nowhere particular to be. At the bottom of the stairs, voices drifted toward her from a half-open sitting room. She stopped. Too soon," a woman was saying. Aunt Sarah. Claire stayed where she was, hidden by the curve of the staircase. Elijah's voice answered, low and controlled. "Timing is my concern." "She is not like the others," Sarah said. "That makes her unpredictable." A pause. Then Elijah said, "It makes her honest." Claire's breath caught. They were talking about her. Sarah gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Honest people are the most dangerous in houses built on appearances." Something in the room shifted. Perhaps Elijah turning. Perhaps Sarah rising. Claire took a careful step back, not wanting to be seen. Then came Elijah's next words, clipped and final. "That will be all." Footsteps approached. Claire moved just in time, gliding into the nearby corridor as Aunt Sarah emerged from the sitting room. Sarah walked past without noticing her, but the expression on the older woman's face was enough to chill the blood. Annoyance, worry, and beneath both, fear. Claire waited until Sarah disappeared before she dared breathe fully again. Honest people are dangerous. Why? Because they asked questions, because they noticed too much, or because they could not be easily controlled. She did not have long to think before Leo appeared. "Ma'am," he said warmly, though his eyes were searching her face more carefully than usual. "Mr. Kensington is waiting for you at breakfast." Waiting? That word sent a strange current through her. "Of course," she said. Leo led her to a sunlit breakfast room overlooking the gardens. Elijah was already there at the long table, seated in his wheelchair, dressed in a crisp charcoal shirt. A newspaper lay folded near his hand, untouched. He looked as composed as he had yesterday, as if midnight shadows and impossible footsteps had never existed. "Good morning," he said. Claire took her seat across from him. "Good morning." Servants moved quietly around them, setting down tea, fruit, warm bread, and omelets. The spread was generous, almost absurdly so. Claire had rarely eaten in such luxury, yet she could barely taste the tea when she lifted it to her lips. Elijah noticed. He noticed everything. "You did not sleep well," he said. It was not a question. Claire set down her cup carefully. "No." A beat passed. "New places can do that," Elijah said. Claire looked at him directly. "So can strange noises in the hallway." The servants froze for half a second before resuming their work. A tiny reaction, but not tiny enough. Elijah's expression did not change. "Is that what kept you awake?" I heard footsteps. A silence stretched between them. Leo, standing near the doorway, lowered his gaze. Claire saw that too. She leaned back slightly. "And I thought I saw someone walking." Elijah folded his napkin with quiet precision. "This is a large house. Sounds travel. That would explain the sound," she said. "Not what I saw." Now his eyes lifted fully to hers. Dark, steady. "What did you see, Claire?" The way he said her name, calm, almost gentle, would have fooled anyone who did not know better. But Claire heard the hidden challenge beneath it. "How much do you know?" Someone standing in the dark," she said. Tall, broad-shouldered. Elijah remained still. "Perhaps one of the guards," he said. "Inside the private corridor?" Another pause. Then he gave the smallest shrug. "Then perhaps stress is playing cruel games with your mind." That should have made her angry. Instead, it sharpened her, because a liar often revealed more in what he dismissed than in what he admitted. Claire looked down at her plate, then back at him. "Maybe," she said softly. It was the safest answer. For now. Breakfast continued with brittle politeness. Elijah asked whether the room suited her. Claire answered, "Yes." He informed her that a stylist would come by for clothing. She said she had enough. He said, "Not for this house. Not for this house." Every sentence in this mansion carried a second meaning. When the meal ended, Elijah signaled Leo and began to move away from the table. But before he reached the door, Claire spoke again. "Why did you marry me?" He stopped. The room seemed to hold its breath. Not even the servants dared move. Elijah turned his chair slowly until he faced her again. "We discussed this yesterday," he said. "No," Claire replied. "Yesterday we discussed what the marriage solved. That is not the same question." A flicker crossed his face. Not irritation. Something more restrained than that. Interest. She rose from her chair, unable to remain seated under the weight of his silence. "I was publicly humiliated," she said. "You stepped in and gave my family a clean ending to a dirty scandal. That is the practical answer. I'm asking for the real one." His gaze held hers for so long that the room itself seemed to disappear around them. At last, Elijah said, "Because you were the better choice." Claire frowned. "Compared to what?" He did not answer, and that non-answer told her more than any confession might have. Compared to someone else, compared to some plan, compared to something already in motion before her wedding collapsed. Leo stepped forward then, as if sensing danger in the air. "Sir, your call with the board begins in 10 minutes. Elijah did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Claire. Then finally he said, "There are matters in this house you do not yet understand." Claire crossed her arms tightly over herself. Then help me understand. His expression changed subtly, but enough for her to see it. Regret. Just for an instant. When the time is right, he said. Then he turned and left. The servants exhaled only after he disappeared. Claire remained where she was, staring at the doorway, her pulse beating hard against her throat. When the time is right. A promise or a warning? She stepped away from the table and moved toward the window overlooking the inner courtyard. Below, two men were unloading boxes from a company vehicle. One of them looked up. Their eyes met briefly. Then he looked away too quickly, almost guilty. Claire followed his line of sight and saw the second-floor balcony across the courtyard. A wheelchair sat there in the sunlight. Empty. Her breath stopped. Empty. But Elijah had just left the room in that chair. Unless... No. She looked again. This time, a servant stepped out onto the balcony, noticed the wheelchair, and hurried to wheel it away. Not Elijah's chair, then, or another one, a decoy. Before Claire could think further, movement below caught her attention again. A delivery crate had tipped slightly as the men carried it, and something inside shifted against the slatted wood. Not paperwork, not machines. It sounded like metal. Heavy metal, locked away. The man who had met her eyes barked an order, and the crate was quickly covered with a tarp before being carried through a side entrance. Claire stood, motionless. In one morning, she had learned 3 things. The staff were afraid. Aunt Sarah was worried, and Elijah Kensington was hiding more than one kind of truth. The marriage she had entered as a wounded stranger was turning into something else now. A maze, a test, a trap, and somewhere inside it, beneath the wheelchair, the rules, the lies, and the silence, was the real man. The question was no longer whether Elijah was deceiving her. The question was why, and whether the answer would destroy her or save her. By the 3rd day of her marriage, Claire understood one thing with painful clarity. Elijah Kensington never wasted a word. He did not speak to comfort. He did not speak to impress. And he certainly did not explain himself. Yet somehow, in a house where every corridor seemed built to hide something, his silence had begun to feel different from the silence she had known all her life. Her mother's silence had abandoned her. Her stepfather's silence had sold her. Her sister's silence had concealed betrayal with a smile. But Elijah's silence, it watched, it calculated, and sometimes disturbingly, it protected. That morning, Claire sat in the small reading room attached to her private wing, trying and failing to focus on a book placed in her hands by one of the maids. The words blurred together. Her mind kept returning to the crate, the empty wheelchair, Aunt Sarah's warning, and the impossible memory of Elijah standing in the dark. She was so deep in thought that she barely heard the knock at first. Then came another, sharp, impatient. Without waiting for permission, the door opened. Zoe walked in, as if she belonged there. She wore a fitted cream dress, gold earrings, and the kind of triumphant smile Claire had seen on her face at the altar. The smile of someone who thought she had won forever. Claire stood slowly. For one suspended second, neither sister spoke. Then Zoe let her eyes drift around the room. "Well," she said, "you recovered quickly." The cruelty in her tone was effortless. Claire did not move. "What are you doing here?" Zoe clicked her tongue. "Still so cold. I came to check on my little sister." "You came to admire the damage," Claire said. A flicker of amusement passed over Zoe's face. "Maybe," she admitted. There it was. No pretense, no apology. Zoe crossed the room and ran her fingertips over the carved edge of a cabinet. "I have to admit," she said lightly, "when Kevin decided to leave you at the altar, I expected tears, screaming, maybe a collapse dramatic enough to entertain the guests. Her eyes returned to Claire. But marrying Elijah Kensington... She laughed softly. That was unexpected, even for you. Claire kept her chin raised. Then say what you came to say. Zoe's expression hardened just a little. Fine, she said. Kevin and I are planning a private celebration dinner next week. It would be awkward if you made a scene in public before then. Claire stared at her. A celebration, for stealing her fiancé, for humiliating her in front of hundreds. Something inside Claire turned cold. You think I care about your dinner? Zoe stepped closer. I think, she said quietly, that women like us only survive by accepting reality faster than our pride allows. Women like us. As if they were the same. As if Zoe had not sharpened herself on Claire's wounds for years. You didn't steal Kevin because you loved him, Claire said. You stole him because you wanted to prove you could. For the first time, Zoe's smile faltered, only slightly. Then it returned. And yet, she said, he still chose me. The words landed, but not the way Zoe expected. Because this time, they no longer pierced. They revealed. Kevin had chosen selfishness. Zoe had chosen cruelty. That was not love. That was rot. Claire drew a slow breath. You should leave. Zoe's eyes narrowed. Don't pretend you're above this. You're living in a strange man's mansion. Because our family needed to cover your shame. My shame. Not Kevin's betrayal. Not Zoe's treachery. Mine. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Before she could answer, another voice entered the room. Ms. Hayes, Leo said from the doorway. Mr. Kensington does not permit unannounced guests in this wing. His tone was polite, but only just. Zoe turned sharply, clearly irritated at being interrupted by a servant. I'm her sister. Leo gave a small nod. And this is not your house. The silence that followed was delicious. Claire saw the flash of humiliation on Zoe's face, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt something dangerously close to satisfaction. Zoe straightened, recovering quickly. Tell your employer I was leaving anyway. Leo did not move. He simply waited. That was enough. Zoe shot Claire one last poisonous look and swept out of the room. The moment she was gone, the air changed. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Leo, she said quietly. How did you know she was here? He hesitated. That hesitation again. I was informed, he said carefully, by Elijah. Leo's expression remained respectful, but his eyes lowered for half a second. Answer enough. Claire looked toward the doorway through which Zoe had disappeared. He had known. He had intervened. Not publicly, not grandly, but deliberately. Why? Before she could ask more, Leo added, Mr. Kensington would like to see you in the West Garden, if you are willing. If you are willing. That choice, however small, mattered more to Claire than it should have. I'll come, she said. The West Garden was quieter than the front grounds, enclosed by tall hedges and flowering trees. A stone path curved around a reflecting pool, and near it sat Elijah in his wheelchair beneath the shade of a jacaranda tree. From a distance, the image was peaceful, almost gentle. Up close, Elijah looked exactly as he always did. Composed, unreadable, dressed in dark elegance, as though emotion itself had no permission to touch him. You sent for me, Claire said. Elijah glanced up. Yes. She stopped a few steps away. You had Zoe removed. I protected my boundaries, he said. Claire folded her arms. Your boundaries. His gaze sharpened. And yours. That answer unsettled her more than if he had denied it. You didn't have to do that, she said. Correct, Elijah replied. I chose to. Again, blunt honesty. Again, no softness in the wording. yet something undeniably soft in the action. Claire stood silent for a moment, studying him. Why? Elijah looked away briefly, toward the water. Because predators return to places where they once tasted weakness, he said. I do not allow that in my house. The words sank deep. Predators. Weakness. My house. He was not speaking only of Zoe. He was speaking of a rule, a law, a world view shaped by battles Claire still could not see. She sat on the stone bench across from him. "And what am I in your house?" she asked quietly. His eyes returned to her. The breeze stirred the purple blossoms above them, and one petal drifted down between them like a suspended thought. "You are under my protection," he said. The sentence was simple, but the effect was not. No one had ever said those words to Claire, and made them sound like a promise instead of a claim. She looked down at her hands. "That sounds noble," she said after a moment. "But you still haven't told me why." Elijah leaned back slightly. "I told you," he said. "You were the better choice." "That is not a reason. It is a conclusion." Something in his face shifted. Something so small most people would have missed it. But Claire had spent years surviving other people's moods. She saw it. Amusement. Very slight, very controlled. "You ask dangerous questions," Elijah said. "I ask direct ones. That can be more dangerous." She lifted her chin. "Then perhaps you should stop giving me half-truths." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then unexpectedly, Elijah said, "Did Kevin ever apologize?" The abruptness of the question struck her. "No." "And your mother?" Claire almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. She apologized for the embarrassment, not for the betrayal. Elijah's jaw tightened. Barely, but enough. Claire noticed everything now. He said nothing, yet somehow his quiet anger on her behalf made her chest ache. He sounded more offended for her than any member of her own family had been. A servant approached then with a tray of tea and scones. Elijah gave a short nod, and the items were placed between them. As the servant withdrew, Claire reached automatically for the teapot. She paused. "You take tea?" she asked Elijah. "Yes. How much sugar?" "None." She poured his cup first, then hers. It was a small thing, ordinary, domestic even, but the stillness around them changed. Not dramatically, not romantically, just enough to feel it. Elijah accepted the cup from her hand. Their fingers brushed again, warm, steady, real. He did not pull away immediately this time. Neither did she. Then the moment passed. Claire looked out at the pool, suddenly too aware of her own heartbeat. "You knew about the wedding," she said, her voice softer now. Elijah said nothing. "That wasn't a question," she added. He set the teacup down with precise calm. "Yes," he said. She turned sharply to face him. "How much?" "Enough." The answer lit a spark of anger in her. "You knew I was being betrayed. And you did nothing." Elijah's gaze held hers without flinching. "If I had intervened before Kevin exposed himself," he said, "your family would have denied everything, reconciled publicly, and sold you into a slower form of misery." The cruelty of the truth hit harder, because it felt true. He continued, voice low and even. "Some masks do not come off until people believe they are safe enough to be cruel in daylight." Claire stared at him. There it was again. Not comfort, not flattery. Truth. Brutal and clean, and beneath it, care. He had let the betrayal happen, but he had also understood it in a way she had not yet been able to. A furious part of her wanted to hate him for that. Another part knew he might be right. She looked away, shaken by the conflict inside her. After a long silence, she asked, "So what am I supposed to do with that?" Elijah's voice softened. "Not much, but enough to matter." "Survive it," he said. Then decide who you become after it. The wind moved again through the jacaranda branches. A petal landed on the arm of Elijah's wheelchair. Without thinking, Claire leaned forward to brush it away. The moment her fingers neared the chair, Elijah's entire body went still. Not startled, guarded. A wall slamming into place. Claire froze too, then slowly withdrew her hand. There. Another rule. Another hidden wire she had nearly stepped on. She sat back. "I see," she murmured. Elijah said nothing, but the tension in his shoulders lingered. The softness of the moment had vanished. In its place was the reminder that whatever tenderness lived in him was chained tightly to secrets. As if to confirm it, Leo appeared at the edge of the garden path. "Sir," he said, "the report from the head office has arrived." Elijah's expression changed instantly. Warmer traces erased, control restored. "Bring it to the study." "Yes, sir." Claire watched him as he turned his chair. Before he could leave, she spoke one last time. "Elijah," he paused. "You protect me," she said quietly. "Why?" For a second, the answer seemed dangerously close to surfacing, but whatever she saw in his eyes disappeared almost at once, and when he spoke, his voice was back behind its armor. "Because no one else did." Then he rolled away. Claire remained beneath the jacaranda tree, long after he was gone, the untouched half of her tea growing cold in her hands. Because no one else did. It was not a declaration. It was not an explanation. But it was the most human thing he had said to her yet, and it frightened her more than the secrets. Because somewhere between the lies in the hallway, the rules in the mansion, and the quiet way he stood between her and humiliation, Claire had begun to feel something she had not expected to feel in this marriage. Not trust, not yet, but the dangerous beginning of it. 3 nights later, the truth stopped hiding. It did not arrive gently. It did not come wrapped in explanation or softened with mercy. It came like a door, kicked open inside Claire's chest. The evening had begun, quietly, too quietly. Rain pressed against the windows of the Kensington estate in silver sheets, and thunder moved low across the sky like a warning too distant for anyone else to heed. Most of the household had withdrawn early. Aunt Sarah had left after dinner with tight lips and sharper eyes than usual. Leo had been summoned twice to Elijah's private study. Staff hurried through the corridors with the strained silence of people who sensed a storm deeper than the one outside. Claire felt it too. Something in the mansion was tightening, something already in motion. She had tried to read, then tried to sleep, then finally given up and wrapped a shawl over her shoulders before stepping into the corridor. The air was cooler than usual. Somewhere below, a clock chimed 11. As she moved toward the staircase, she heard voices, male voices, low, urgent, not from the main hall, from the west wing. Elijah's wing. She stopped at once. That section of the house was usually quiet at night, and staff entered it only when summoned. Claire should have turned back. She knew that. Every instinct shaped by years of punishment told her not to go searching for truths that powerful people preferred, buried. But another instinct, newer, harder, born on the day her life shattered at the altar, refused. She followed the voices. The corridor darkened as she moved deeper into the forbidden wing. The lamps here were dimmer, the walls lined with old family portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to follow her. Rain tapped against the tall, arched windows. The voices grew clearer. "The board meeting is in 48 hours, one man was saying. "If we move now, Darius will show his hand." Leo. Claire knew his voice at once. Another voice answered. Lower, colder. "Elijah." "He already has," Elijah said. "He just thinks no one noticed." Claire stepped closer to the half-open study door. Leo again. "And Aunt Sarah." A pause. Then Elijah said, "She is afraid." Fear makes people impatient. That will help us. Claire frowned. Us? Help us do what? She shifted slightly, trying to see inside through the narrow opening. At first, she saw only the edge of the desk, the glow of a lamp, and shadows moving across the carpet. Then she saw something else. The wheelchair, empty. Her breath caught so sharply, she had to clamp her hand over her mouth. Empty. Not parked beside Elijah, not occupied, just standing there near the desk like a prop abandoned between scenes. A pulse of cold raced through her body. No, that was impossible. Her eyes lifted, almost against her will, and there he was, Elijah Kensington, standing, not leaning, not struggling. Standing straight beside the desk in a dark shirt with his sleeves rolled to his forearms, one hand braced against the polished wood, the other holding a folder full of documents. His posture was effortless, natural, powerful. He was not a man relearning how to stand. He was a man who had never lost the ability. Claire could not breathe. For one long, terrible second, the entire world narrowed to that single image. The man she had married. The man who had spoken in cold fragments and careful truths. The man who had let her pour his tea, watch his restraint, trust his pain, standing, whole, lying. The shawl slipped from her shoulder and brushed the wall. A tiny sound, but enough. Inside the study, both men turned. Elijah's eyes met hers first, and in that instant, everything changed. Leo swore softly under his breath. Claire stepped backward, but Elijah was already moving fast with none of the measured slowness she had come to associate with him. He crossed the room in long, controlled strides and opened the door fully. There was no use pretending now, no wheelchair, no fragile half-explanations. Only truth, stripped bare and merciless. Claire stared at him, as if she were looking at a ghost. "You can walk," she whispered. The words were small, broken, pathetic compared to the violence of what she felt. Elijah did not answer immediately. That silence, his silence, was suddenly unbearable. "You can walk," she repeated, louder this time, stepping back again as if distance could protect her from the humiliation. "All this time you can walk." "Claire! No!" Her voice cracked like something splitting open. "Don't say my name as if I'm supposed to feel calm," she snapped. "Don't say it like I'm the one overreacting." Leo lowered his head and moved discreetly away from the doorway, but Claire barely noticed. All she could see was Elijah. All she could feel was the memory of every moment she had doubted herself. The footsteps in the hall, the empty wheelchair on the balcony, the rules about his body, his room, his chair, the way he had looked at her with those unreadable eyes while hiding the most important truth of all. "You lied to me," she said. Elijah held her gaze. Yes, the simplicity of it hit harder than denial would have. No excuse, no attempt to soften it. "Just yes." Claire laughed once, a small, ugly sound. "Of course," she said. "Of course you did. Why not? My family sold me. My fiancé betrayed me. My sister humiliated me. Why should my husband be any different?" A flash moved across Elijah's face. Pain, regret. She didn't care. "You made me think." She stopped, swallowing hard. "You let me think. You were vulnerable." His voice was quiet when he answered. "I am." The response was so unexpected that she almost faltered. Then anger surged up again, hotter. "No," she said. "No, don't do that. Don't twist words with me. Not now, not when I saw you standing there like all of this." She gestured wildly, her breath shaking. "Was just some game." "It is not a game." "Then what is it?" Elijah glanced once toward the study where files still lay open across the desk, then back to her. "A war," he said. The word struck the air between them. Claire stared at him. Rain hammered harder against the windows. At last, Elijah stepped aside from the doorway. Come inside. She should have refused. She should have walked away, locked herself in her room, and let him choke on his own secrets. But she needed answers now, more than she needed pride. Claire entered the study on trembling legs. The room smelled faintly of cedar, paper, and storm-soaked air. Leo closed the door quietly behind them and stood at a respectful distance, his expression strained with concern. Elijah moved back toward the desk. Not stealthily now, not pretending weakness, not arranging himself into the careful image she had known. He simply moved. And somehow that honesty in motion hurt more than the lie itself. "I did not tell you," he said, "because the fewer people who knew, the safer the operation remained." She folded her arms across herself as if to keep from breaking apart. "Operation?" "Yes. You talk like I'm standing in some boardroom briefing, not in the wreckage of another lie." His jaw tightened. "Would you rather I insult you with softer words?" She flinched. Because that was the problem, wasn't it? He refused false comfort, even now, especially now. "What operation?" she asked through clenched teeth. Elijah looked at Leo once. Leo gave a small nod, as if confirming a decision had been made. Then Elijah opened the folder in his hand and spread several documents across the desk. "These are transfer orders, shell company reports, and private correspondence," he said. "Over the last 18 months, someone inside Kensington Holdings has been siphoning money, moving assets, and preparing to strip control of the company from my hands." Claire stared at the papers without really seeing them. "When the accident happened 2 years ago," Elijah continued, "the board expected me to recover quickly. When I did not return publicly, they grew bold. When I allowed the world to believe I had lost the use of my legs, they grew careless. Understanding came in pieces, ugly, sharp. You pretended to be disabled," she said slowly. "Yes, to draw them out. Yes, to see who would circle you when they thought you were weak. A beat, yes." Claire looked at him as if she had never known his face at all. "And my family?" Elijah's expression darkened. "They were approached after the engagement between you and Kevin became useful." Her blood ran cold. "Kevin was part of this." "Elijah," Leo said carefully, as if warning him. But Claire snapped, "No, let him answer." Elijah did. "Kevin wanted access," he said. "Your stepfather wanted leverage. Darius Vance wanted allies outside the company who could be controlled through money and reputation. Your wedding created a convenient bridge." The room seemed to tilt. Convenient. That word again. She had not just been betrayed by a faithless man. She had been positioned, used. Her marriage to Kevin, the public spectacle, the sudden rescue through Elijah. All of it existed inside a larger design. Not all planned in full, but all exploited. A chill climbed her spine. "And me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was I in your war?" Elijah did not answer at once, and that hesitation frightened her more than the papers. Finally, he said, "At first, an unexpected variable." Claire closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. "At first," she repeated. "And later," his voice dropped lower. "Later, someone I could not ignore." The words should have meant something. Perhaps on another night they would have, but pain made poor soil for tenderness. Claire opened her eyes and looked at him with raw disbelief. "So you tested me, too." Elijah did not deny it. "I observed," he said. She laughed bitterly. "What a generous word. I needed to know whether you were aligned with them. Because I come from them. Because betrayal often wears the face of family." That stopped her. Not because it excused him, but because it was true. Terribly true. And she hated him for saying it first. Leo stepped forward then, his voice low and earnest. "Ma'am, he never intended to hurt you." Claire turned to him sharply. "Then what exactly do you call this?" Leo had no answer. Of course he didn't, because intention did not erase injury. Elijah came around the desk slowly, stopping a careful distance from her. His voice, when he spoke again, was stripped of almost everything but truth. "I would rather have earned your anger than buried you in a lie you could not survive." Claire stared at him. "You don't get to decide what I can survive." "No," he said, "but I do get to decide how to stop the people trying to destroy everything around us." Us. There it was again. That dangerous little word. She should have rejected it. Maybe part of her did, but another part had already heard too much, seen too much, felt too much, and beneath the anger, a deeper terror was rising. If Elijah had been lying about this, then how many enemies were already inside the house? How close had danger truly been? How much of her marriage had been performance, and how much had not? Claire took one step back, then another. "I need air," she said. Elijah did not stop her. But just before she reached the door, he spoke one last time. "Claire," she paused without turning. "I did deceive you," he said. "But the danger is real. Darius is moving faster than expected. Your family may already know more than they should. From this moment on, you must assume every kindness offered by them has a price attached." Claire's hand tightened on the doorknob. Then she looked back at him over her shoulder. For the first time, she saw the full, unhidden force of him, not in the body he had concealed, but in the burden he carried behind his eyes. He was not harmless, he was not broken, but he was not untouched either. And that made everything worse, because now she could no longer sort truth from manipulation with the clean certainty of anger alone. "You should have trusted me," she said. Then she opened the door and walked out into the storm-lit corridor, leaving Elijah standing on his own 2 feet in the ruins of the lie he had chosen. And for the second time in 1 week, Claire felt the ground beneath her life split open. Only this time she was no longer the abandoned bride. She was the wife of a man who had built his survival out of deception. And whether that deception would protect her or destroy what remained of her heart had yet to be seen. The next morning, the mansion felt different. Not louder, not warmer, just sharper, as if every object inside it had developed an edge overnight. Claire understood the reason. She had crossed an invisible threshold. Before, she had been a confused wife, standing outside Elijah's secrets, sensing their outlines but not their shape. Now she stood inside them, not fully trusted, not fully informed, but no longer sheltered by ignorance. And ignorance, she was beginning to realize, had been the last soft thing left in her life. She did not go to breakfast. She sent word through one of the maids that she was unwell and remained in her room, though illness had nothing to do with the storm moving through her. Anger did, betrayal did. The memory of Elijah walking toward her with effortless strength while she stood in the wreckage of another lie did. Yet beneath all of that, there was something even more dangerous. Understanding. Not forgiveness, certainly not trust, but understanding. She hated it because it kept interfering with her right to despise him. By noon, the rain had cleared, leaving the sky washed and bright above the estate. Claire finally stepped out onto the small balcony attached to her sitting room, needing air more than solitude. The gardens below shimmered with wet leaves and dark soil. Somewhere in the distance, she heard staff moving crates again. Men spoke in low voices. A car engine started, then stopped. Nothing in this house ever sounded innocent anymore. A soft knock came at her door. She turned, already tense. "Come in." It was Leo. He entered carefully, as though approaching an injured animal. "Ma'am," he said. Claire folded her arms. "If Elijah sent you to smooth this over, save your breath. Leo did not flinch. He sent no such instruction. Then why are you here? He hesitated, choosing his words. Because things are changing faster than expected. That was not an answer. It was a warning. Claire looked at him more closely. He seemed more strained than usual. His neat composure remained, but the lines around his eyes had deepened. What happened? She asked. Leo lowered his voice instinctively, even though they were alone. The financial press received a leak this morning. There are rumors that Kensington Holdings is unstable. Investors are nervous. 2 board members who were silent before are suddenly demanding emergency review meetings. Claire frowned. And Mr. Kensington intends to let them believe the rumors. She stared at him. He's doing this on purpose. Yes, a bitter laugh escaped her. Of course he is. Leo said nothing. Claire moved away from the balcony and toward the table where untouched tea had long gone cold. So this is the next stage, she said. He pretends to lose power, and everyone shows their true face. Yes. And I'm supposed to what? Sit quietly and admire the strategy. Leo's voice softened. You are supposed to be careful. That answer made her still. Why? Because once fear enters the room, desperate people stop acting rationally. Claire held his gaze. And my family? She asked. Where do they fit into this next stage? Leo's silence lasted just a second too long. Enough. They've contacted you, she said. It wasn't a question. Leo exhaled. Your mother called the house this morning. She requested to see you privately. Claire felt something harden inside her. Of course, now that rumors of weakness surrounded Elijah, they were circling again. Predators returned to places where they once tasted weakness. Elijah's words came back to her with cruel clarity. When? She asked. She is waiting in the south parlor. Claire almost refused out of pure instinct. Then she changed her mind. No, let them come. Let them speak plainly for once. Tell her I'll be there, she said. Leo nodded, but before leaving he added, Ma'am? She looked up. Whatever they offer, he said quietly. It will not be for your good. Then he left. Claire stood still for a long moment after the door closed. Whatever they offer, she already knew. Money, belonging, apologies shaped like hooks. The familiar language of family when family wanted something. She dressed with slow care, choosing neither grief nor grandeur. A simple, deep green dress, no elaborate jewelry, her hair pulled neatly back. She would not go to them looking broken, but neither would she go dressed for battle. When she entered the south parlor, Beatrice Hayes rose so quickly that her teacup rattled in its saucer. Claire, her mother breathed, rushing forward with outstretched hands. Claire stepped aside before she could be embraced. The hurt that flashed across Beatrice's face might once have moved her. Not now. You wanted to see me, Claire said. Her mother faltered, then lowered herself back into the chair with shaky grace. Yes, she said. Please, sit. Claire remained standing. The silence sharpened. Beatrice glanced toward the door, then back to her daughter. You look tired. Claire almost smiled. A week ago, she might have mistaken this for concern. Now she heard the testing beneath it. How damaged are you? How close to yielding? I'm listening, Claire said. Beatrice's fingers tightened around her cup. There are troubling stories in the papers. There are always troubling stories in the papers. Claire, her mother's voice thinned. Don't be difficult. The old phrase landed between them like a hand reaching for a throat. Claire's expression did not change. You did not come here to discuss headlines. Beatrice swallowed. Your stepfather is worried. If Elijah's position is weakening, then your own future becomes uncertain. There it was. Not are you safe, not are you happy. Your future becomes uncertain, meaning Your value may be dropping. Claire said nothing. So, Beatrice continued, gathering momentum now that she had crossed into the truth. There may still be a way to protect you, if you are willing to be practical. Practical. Another family word for betrayal, dressed as wisdom. And what would practicality look like this time? Claire asked, her voice almost soft. Beatrice leaned forward. Darius Vance is prepared to help stabilize matters. The name struck like ice water. Claire's gaze sharpened. Darius? Yes. He has influence with the board. He believes this chaos can be contained, but only if Elijah stops resisting what is inevitable. And what is inevitable? Her mother hesitated. A transition. Claire stared at her. Not a rumor, then. A move, a grab for power. Darius was not merely reacting to instability. He was helping create it. What do you want from me? Claire asked. Beatrice's eyes flickered with something like relief. At last, they had reached the center. Only information, she said quickly. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would harm you. If Elijah is hiding documents, allies, financial reserves, knowing where they are could help avoid a very public collapse. You could save everyone a great deal of pain. For one suspended second, Claire heard nothing at all. Then she laughed. Her mother flinched. It was not a loud laugh. It was worse. A small, astonished sound of someone finally seeing the full ugliness of what stood before her. You came here, Claire said, to ask me to spy on my husband. Claire, please! You came into his house after selling me once already, she continued, her voice rising now with cold clarity, and asked me to betray him because powerful men are fighting over money. It is not like that. It is exactly like that. Beatrice stood, too, tears springing instantly to her eyes. You think I wanted any of this? Do you think I enjoy begging for scraps from men who decide everything? I am trying to keep this family alive. Claire's face hardened. No, she said. You are trying to keep your place. Her mother recoiled as if slapped. For the first time, Claire saw something naked in her expression. Not guilt, not even love. Fear. The kind that corrodes a person until they begin offering others to the fire just to stay warm themselves. And suddenly, Claire understood something she had not fully grasped before. Her mother had not betrayed her because she did not know the pain it would cause. She had betrayed her because she had decided Claire's pain was survivable, useful, acceptable. That truth burned away the last fragile thread of softness inside her. Beatrice took a desperate step forward. Listen to me. If Elijah falls, the people around him will fall with him. This is bigger than your pride. Darius can protect us if you help him. Us? The word turned foul in Claire's ears. There is no us, she said. Her mother's face went white. Claire? No. Her voice shook now, not with weakness but force. You do not get to use that word with me after what you did. You do not get to stand in front of me and talk about family while asking me to stab another man in the back because it might benefit you. Beatrice's tears spilled over. He deceived you too. That hit hard because it was true, and because her mother wielded it as a weapon rather than a wound. Claire felt the brief cut of it, but only briefly. Yes, she said. He did. Her mother seized on the admission instantly. Then why protect him? Claire went still. Why protect him? Because he had lied, yes. Because he had tested her, yes. Because he had manipulated truths and kept her in the dark, yes. But also, because when the room had gone cruel, he had stepped between her and further humiliation. Because when her sister came to gloat, he had her removed. Because when he said, because no one else did, something real had broken through the armor. Because whatever else he was, he had not asked her to become filth in order to survive. Claire looked at her mother and knew her answer. Because he has done wrong to me, she said. But not in the way you have. Beatrice stared, uncomprehending. Claire took one step toward the door. "Tell Darius this," she said without turning. "I will not help him. I will not help Kevin. I will not help Robert. And if any of you come into this house again, asking me to betray my husband, I will make sure Elijah hears every word." Her mother's voice cracked behind her. "You would choose him over your own family?" Claire paused at the threshold. Then she looked back. "No," she said. "I am choosing the first person in this entire mess who did not ask me to betray myself." And with that, she walked out. The corridor beyond seemed brighter than before. Not safer, but cleaner. The choice had been made. Not love, not reconciliation. A line, a side, a truth she would now have to live inside. By the time she reached the central hall, she found Elijah waiting there. Not seated, standing. No pretense now, no chair. He had shed that lie, at least. He was dressed for war. Dark suit, unyielding posture. Eyes fixed on her as if he had already read the answer in her face before she spoke. "You heard," Claire said. "I heard enough." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had deceived her, protected her, angered her, unsettled her. Then she said the one thing that changed everything. "I won't help them." Something in Elijah's gaze shifted. Not triumph, not relief. Something deeper, quieter. Respect. "They will move soon," he said. Claire nodded. "Then so will we." And in that moment, beneath the polished ceilings and silent servants and gathering danger, the broken bride, who had once stood humiliated at an altar, made the first clear choice of her new life. Not to be used, not to be traded, not to be turned into someone else's weapon. Whatever Elijah's war truly was, she had just chosen her side. The attack came 2 days later. Not with guns, not with shouting in the night, not with masked men climbing walls. It came the way the most dangerous attacks often did in powerful families and rich companies. In tailored suits with official documents, and in calm voices, pretending not to tremble. By 8 o'clock in the morning, every major executive at Kensington Holdings had been summoned to an emergency board meeting at the company's glass headquarters downtown. Investors had been alerted. Legal advisors had arrived. Rumors were already spreading across business channels that Elijah Kensington was about to be formally removed as acting head of the company, due to medical incapacity and unstable executive judgment. The words were polished, respectable, professional, and filthy. Claire stood in front of the bedroom mirror, fastening the final clasp of a simple pearl earring, while the television in the corner played a morning segment speculating on the future of Kensington Holdings. A journalist smiled into the camera with rehearsed sympathy. "If the reports are true," she said, "today may mark the end of Elijah Kensington's era." Claire clicked the television off. The silence that followed felt cleaner. Behind her, Elijah stood near the window, already dressed in a charcoal suit so sharply cut it made him look almost dangerous enough to slice through the sunlight. He had not used the wheelchair at all since the night she discovered the truth. The chair still existed somewhere in the house, somewhere in the theater of his deception, but now it had been set aside, like a mask no longer useful. He watched her reflection in the mirror. "You don't have to come," he said. Claire met his gaze through the glass. "Yes, I do. This meeting will not be civil. Neither was my wedding." Something flickered in his expression. Not amusement, not exactly. More like recognition. She turned to face him fully. "For days they have lied, leaked, manipulated, and circled," she said. "My mother tried to recruit me. Darius is moving through the board. Kevin and Robert are sniffing around like jackals. If today is the day they finally stop pretending, then I would rather see it with my own eyes." Elijah held her gaze for a long moment. Then he gave a single nod. "Stay near Leo," he said, "no matter what happens." Claire did not promise, but she remembered. Kensington Holdings towered above the city like a monument to ambition. Glass, steel, silence, and power. By the time their car pulled into the underground entrance, media vans had already gathered outside the main gate. Security was doubled. Staff moved through the lobby with controlled panic, tucked behind stiff posture and lowered voices. As Elijah stepped out of the car, every nearby employee seemed to change shape at once. Some straightened with relief, some stiffened with fear, some lowered their eyes so fast it almost became a confession. Claire saw it all. Power never simply lived in titles, it lived in reactions. And whatever the press was saying outside, Elijah still commanded something inside these walls that no rumor had managed to kill. They rode the private lift to the executive floor in silence. Leo stood beside the panel, one hand clasped behind his back, face unreadable. Claire could feel the current in the elevator air, thick, metallic, waiting. When the doors opened, they stepped into a corridor lined with dark wood and tinted glass. At the far end stood the boardroom doors, closed, guarded, prepared. And just outside them, Darius Vance. He turned the instant he saw them. Tall, precise, expensive in the way only corporate predators could be. Darius wore a navy suit and an expression of carefully measured concern. A man who had learned long ago that treachery appeared more effective when it smiled first. "Elijah," he said, as if greeting an old friend at a charity dinner. "You came." Elijah did not slow his pace. "I rarely miss events arranged in my name." Darius's gaze shifted to Claire. "Mrs. Kensington," he said, dipping his head just enough to mimic respect. "This may be an uncomfortable morning for you." Claire returned his look without blinking. "I imagine it will be more uncomfortable for the wrong people." For a fraction of a second, Darius's smile tightened. Good. Let him feel the edge. The boardroom doors opened before anyone could say more. Inside, the room was already full. Board members sat along both sides of the polished conference table. Lawyers occupied one end. Financial analysts shuffled papers near a wall screen displaying market fluctuations. At the far side of the room sat Aunt Sarah, composed in pale gold silk, her face unreadable, except for the hard line around her mouth. And further down, Kevin, Robert, and Zoe. Not official board members, not entitled to be there on company grounds in any formal capacity. Yet there they were, because corruption always invited extra witnesses when it believed it was about to win. Claire felt something cold and steady settle inside her. No more doubt, no more half-trust, no more wondering how deep the rot went. Deep enough to bring her whole ruined past into the room to watch Elijah fall. Elijah walked to the head of the table. "Let us begin," he said. The chairman, an older man with tired eyes and a voice practiced in institutional cowardice, cleared his throat. "This emergency session has been called to address concerns regarding the recent financial volatility, executive transparency, and questions surrounding the continuing leadership capacity of Mr. Elijah Kensington." Leadership capacity. Claire nearly laughed. What a neat phrase for theft. Darius rose first, as expected. He moved to the screen, remote in hand, and began presenting charts, leaked reports, and statements from unnamed, concerned stakeholders. Every word sounded clean, responsible, necessary. That was what made it obscene. "We must think of the company's future," Darius said gravely. "We cannot allow personal pride, emotional decision-making, or concealed medical realities to jeopardize thousands of employees and shareholders." Concealed medical realities. Aunt Sarah lowered her eyes. Kevin smirked. Robert sat with that greasy stillness of a man who believed he had backed the winning horse. Claire watched Elijah. He said nothing. "Not yet," Darius continued, building momentum. He spoke of instability, of investors losing confidence, of the burden of a disabled executive trying to maintain symbolic rather than practical control. He recommended a temporary transfer of strategic authority to an interim committee. Interim, another clean word for a permanent theft once the door was open. Then came the final push. Darius placed both hands on the table and said with solemn righteousness, "For the good of Kensington Holdings, I move that Elijah Kensington be suspended from executive command, pending full medical review and board-led restructuring." Several hands moved at once, too quickly, too eagerly, prepared in advance. Claire saw it. So did Elijah. So did everyone with a conscience left alive in that room. The chairman swallowed. "Very well. Before we proceed to a formal vote, does Mr. Kensington wish to respond?" Silence. A full breath. Then Elijah rose. Not from a wheelchair, not from weakness. From his chair at the table, with unhurried, devastating calm. The room changed in an instant. It did not merely go quiet. It broke. Someone gasped sharply. A pen clattered onto the floor. A lawyer half stood without realizing it. Aunt Sarah's face drained of color. Kevin's mouth fell open. Zoe recoiled as if she had seen the dead stand up. And Darius. Darius froze, just for one precious second, long enough for his fear to show before discipline dragged it back behind his eyes. Elijah stood fully upright at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly against the leather chair in front of him. "I have considered," he said, his voice low and precise, "allowing this performance to continue for another 5 minutes." No one moved, no one breathed. Then, he lifted a folder from the table and placed it down with deliberate force. "But watching thieves drape themselves in concern has tested even my patience." The words landed like bullets. Darius recovered first. "What is the meaning of this?" Elijah turned his gaze on him. "The meaning," he said, "is that your timing was careless." He nodded once toward Leo, who stepped forward and activated the wall screen. The charts disappeared. In their place appeared transfer records, private emails, account maps, time-stamped messages, shell company registrations, and meeting logs linking Darius to off-book transactions, insider leaks, and coordinated attempts to destabilize investor trust. Murmurs exploded across the room. One board member snatched up his glasses and leaned forward. Another began flipping frantically through the paper packet Leo was now distributing. "No!" Darius said sharply. "These are fabricated." Elijah did not even look at him. "Page 9, he said to the room. "The offshore holding trail. Page 14, the internal leak authorization. Page 21, payment arrangements involving external intermediaries, including Mr. Robert Price." Every eye swung toward Robert. The man visibly blanched. Claire did not blink. "Good. Let the room look. Let them all look." Robert stood halfway. "This is absurd!" Elijah cut him off. "Sit down. You were paid to provide social leverage through family ties and public scandal management. You failed at subtlety." A sound escaped Kevin, something between outrage and panic. Elijah turned then, finally, toward him. "And you," he said, "sold your engagement for access to networks you lacked the intelligence to understand." Kevin flushed deep red. "You can't prove that!" Leo placed another document in front of the nearest legal counsel. The counsel glanced down, then up, slowly. "Yes," he said. "I believe he can." The air cracked. Zoe gripped the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles whitened. Aunt Sarah remained perfectly still. But Claire saw the truth in her eyes now. She had known part of it. Maybe not all, but enough. Elijah faced her next. "Aunt Sarah," he said, and somehow the title sounded colder than any insult. "Your decision to align yourself with fear over loyalty will be noted appropriately." Sarah lifted her chin. "I did what was necessary to protect this family. Elijah's expression did not change. "No," he said. "You did what was necessary to preserve your access to it." There it was again. The brutal cut of plain truth. No decoration, no mercy. Claire felt it move through the room, like fire across dry ground. Darius made one final attempt. "This proves nothing except that you deceived the board for months," he snapped. "You misrepresented your condition. You manipulated governance. I conducted a containment operation," Elijah said, "because someone inside this company was hollowing it out with internal assistance." Then at last, he looked directly at Darius. "And now everyone knows who." Silence, heavy, absolute. Then the chairman, whose cowardice had only ever needed a stronger wind to change direction, cleared his throat with visible effort. "In light of the evidence presented," he said, his voice shaking, "the motion to suspend Mr. Kensington is withdrawn, pending immediate criminal and civil review of the implicated parties." Withdrawn. Such a small word for such a total collapse. Security was called. Not the outer building staff. Internal security. The kind Elijah had positioned long before today. 2 officers entered, then 2 more, and suddenly the men and women who had arrived expecting to strip power from him found themselves being asked not to leave. Robert began protesting. Kevin raised his voice. Zoe stood in disbelief, staring at Claire as if trying to understand how the abandoned bride had somehow ended up on the side that won. But Claire did not feel triumph. Not exactly. She felt release. Something old and poisoned tearing loose inside her chest. Darius was speaking again, too fast now, too loud, the polished mask fully cracked. "This isn't over!" Elijah's answer came like stone. "No," he said, "it is simply no longer hidden." As security moved toward Darius, Claire became aware of a trembling at her side. Aunt Sarah. Not from age, not from grief, from reckoning. She turned her face away before anyone could see too much, but Claire saw enough. And somehow that mattered, because rot was finally being dragged into daylight. Because for once the room had not protected power that lied well. Because betrayal, when stripped of ceremony and expensive language, looked small, ugly, afraid. Elijah turned then, not to the board, not to the lawyers, but to Claire. For one suspended moment, all the noise dimmed. The ruined wedding, the forced marriage, the wheelchair, the lies, the tests, the fury, the protection. All of it stood between them. Yet beneath it all there was also this. He had not asked her to betray herself, and she had not. Claire held his gaze as the room around them fractured into consequences. And for the first time since her life had been shattered at the altar, justice did not feel like a fantasy. It felt like a door opening. The boardroom emptied slowly, but the aftershocks of what had happened stayed in the walls. Security escorted Darius out first, no longer with the deference reserved for executives, but with the cold efficiency used for men whose power had already expired. Robert protested until one of the legal advisors quietly mentioned criminal exposure. Then he stopped speaking. Kevin tried outrage, then denial, then wounded pride. None of it mattered. Zoe left without a word, her face stiff and bloodless, as though silence might still preserve some fragment of dignity. It did not. By the time the doors finally closed behind the last of them, only a handful of people remained in the boardroom. Elijah, Claire, Leo, 2 legal advisors gathering documents, and the chairman, who suddenly looked 20 years older than he had that morning. "Mrs. Kensington," the chairman said awkwardly, "I regret the distress caused." Claire looked at him for a moment. He regretted distress. Not complicity, not cowardice. Distress. It was almost funny. She offered a short nod, not out of forgiveness, but because she had no energy left to spend on weak men trying to sound moral after the danger had passed. The chairman took the nod as mercy and retreated from the room. Soon, only Claire, Elijah, and Leo remained. The silence that settled afterward was unlike any silence they had shared before. This one was not built from suspicion, not entirely, nor from performance, not anymore. It was built from aftermath. Leo was the first to break it. "I'll make sure the press statement is controlled before the market closes," he said, "and I'll have internal security review every access log from the last month." Elijah nodded. "No names released until legal signs off. Freeze all outgoing executive privileges." "Yes, sir." Leo turned to leave, then paused and looked briefly at Claire. There was something almost relieved in his face, as if he had been waiting for this room to become less dangerous. Then he left them alone. The doors closed. The room seemed larger without witnesses. Claire stood near the far end of the long conference table, one hand resting lightly on the polished surface, her body suddenly aware of its own exhaustion. She had not realized how tightly she had been holding herself together until now. Her shoulders ached. Her pulse still beat too hard. The edges of the room felt sharp, overlit. Elijah remained at the head of the table, one hand in his pocket, the other beside the stack of files that had destroyed half a room full of liars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elijah said quietly, "You should sit." Claire let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Now you sound human." A faint shift touched his face. Not quite a smile, but close enough to reveal that he had heard the truth in her remark and accepted it. She moved to one of the chairs along the side of the room and sat. The leather was cold beneath her palms. Elijah did not sit immediately. Instead, he walked to the wall of windows overlooking the city. The afternoon light had changed. The city stretched below them in restless motion, traffic gleaming between glass towers and dusty side streets. Life continued, indifferent to betrayals in boardrooms and marriages built out of wreckage. At last, Elijah spoke. "You were right." Claire looked up. He turned from the window. "About what?" she asked. "You said I should have trusted you." The words landed more deeply than she expected, because he was not deflecting, not analyzing, not defending, just admitting. Claire studied him, wary even now. And you were right," he repeated. There was no drama in his tone, no grand flourish, only the stark weight of a man who did not apologize often, because he did not speak without meaning what he said. Claire leaned back slightly. "That sounds dangerously close to remorse." "It is remorse." She looked at him for a long second, searching for irony. There was none. "Then this day truly is historic," she said. This time, the corner of his mouth moved. Barely, but enough. He stepped closer, though not too close, and rested one hand on the back of a chair opposite her. "When I first heard your name," he said, "it was attached to a problem." Claire's expression hardened a little. "Wonderful beginning." "I know." The candor disarmed her. He continued. "Your engagement to Kevin had become relevant because your stepfather was already in contact with men connected to Darius. At first, you were only a point of access, a social bridge, someone they thought could be used because you were within reach. Convenient." The old word hovered between them, unspoken now but still poisonous. Claire looked down briefly, then back at him. And then Elijah's gaze shifted, not away from her, but inward for a moment, as if he were entering a place he did not often invite others to see. "Then I started asking questions they could not answer consistently." "About me?" "Yes." His voice remained low, steady. "Kevin described you as soft, easy to manage. Your stepfather described you as obedient, invisible when necessary. Your mother said you were emotional." Claire let out a bitter breath. "That sounds like them." "But," Elijah's eyes remained on hers. The staff at the community clinic near your old neighborhood said you visited every month with supplies and never signed your name. A fruit vendor outside your church said you once stayed in the rain for 2 hours to help her sick son get transport to a hospital. An elderly groundskeeper at your mother's estate said you were the only person in that house who ever learned the names of the workers' children. Claire went still. A strange sensation spread through her chest. Not fear, not anger. Exposure. Because those things had been hers. Quiet things, unperformed things, acts done because they felt necessary, not noble. "You investigated me," she said. Yes. The answer should have stung. It did, a little. But what stung more was the realization that he had seen parts of her own family had never cared to notice. Elijah continued, and now something in his voice had changed. It was still controlled, but warmer somehow, less strategic, more personal. "The stories did not fit the woman they described," he said. "That interested me." Claire swallowed. "So that's when I became... what? A better variable?" His gaze sharpened slightly, but there was no irritation in it. "That is when you became someone I wanted to understand for myself." The words settled slowly. He wanted to understand her. Not use, not manage, not arrange. Understand. Claire looked away, toward the windows, toward the city beyond them, because meeting his eyes at that moment suddenly felt too direct. "You had a strange way of showing it," she said quietly. "Yes," Elijah replied. "I did." Silence moved between them again, but softer now. Not resolved, not healed. Just softer. Claire traced the seam of the leather armrest with one thumb. "Why did you agree so quickly at the wedding?" she asked. "That day in the corridor, it felt like you were already waiting." Elijah did not answer at once. When he finally did, his voice had dropped another shade lower. "I was." She turned back sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "that I knew Kevin was likely to expose himself publicly. I did not know precisely how ugly he would make it, but I knew enough to prepare alternatives." "Alternatives," she repeated. He held her gaze. "One of them was marriage." The room seemed to narrow. "You planned to marry me before I even knew my own wedding was collapsing." "I planned," he said carefully, "to ensure you were not handed back to the same people who had already decided your pain was negotiable." That struck straight through her, because it was both infuriating and devastatingly precise. Claire stood up, restless, suddenly too full of emotion to remain seated. She crossed to the windows and wrapped her arms around herself. Below them, the city kept moving. People hurried, cars turned. Somewhere, a siren passed in the distance. "You make everything sound like strategy," she said. "It was strategy, at first." She turned. "At first." The phrase hung between them. Elijah did not retreat from it. "Yes," he said. "At first." Claire stared at him. "And later." The question felt enormous, more dangerous than anything they had discussed all day, because both of them knew what lay beneath it. Not just what changed, but when and why. Elijah took a slow breath. "I do not trust easily," he said. "You know that." "Yes. I do not explain myself unless forced." "I've noticed." Again, that near smile, brief, gone. Then he said, "But somewhere between watching you survive humiliation without becoming cruel and seeing you refuse every invitation to become like the people who hurt you, I stopped seeing you as part of a problem." Claire felt her heartbeat shift, slower, heavier. He stepped toward her. Once, no more than that. "You were standing in a room designed to break your dignity," he said. "And even then, your first instinct was not revenge. It was truth. In this house, in that company, in most of the circles I move in. That is rarer than loyalty. Claire's throat tightened. She should have answered. She did not, because some recognitions were too intimate to meet immediately with words. Elijah's voice softened further. And then you stayed. She frowned slightly. I had nowhere else to go. That is not the same thing. He was right. She knew it. He knew she knew it. Claire looked at him and realized with a kind of inward shock that the man in front of her was more exposed now than he had been standing in that study doorway with his lie shattered around his feet. Because this was not about the wheelchair, not about Darius, not about the company. This was about choice, about regard, about the terrifying possibility that somewhere inside all the secrecy and control, Elijah Kensington had allowed himself to care. Why me? She asked. But this time, the question meant something entirely different. Not, why marry me? But why feel anything at all for me? He understood. Of course he understood. His answer came without hesitation. Because you are the first person in a long time whose kindness did not ask for a witness, he said. Because your honesty costs you something, and you choose it anyway. Because when everyone around you tried to teach you that survival required becoming smaller, colder, or more false, you suffered, but you did not rot. The room went very still. Claire had no defense against words like that, not because they were flattering, because they were observant, earned, because they came from a man who did not waste language on what he did not mean. She felt heat rise behind her eyes and hated it immediately. Not now, not here. She turned slightly away. That is an unfair thing to say to someone after a day like this. Elijah's voice gentled. It is the truth. Claire laughed softly under her breath, but it trembled at the edges. You really do have terrible timing. Frequently. She looked back at him then, and there it was again. That nearly invisible line between them, no longer built only from distrust. Still fragile, still dangerous, but changed. You said once I was under your protection, she murmured. Yes, and now? His gaze did not shift. Now, he said, I would protect you even if you hated me. The honesty of it moved through her like quiet thunder. Too much, too real. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Claire stepped toward him. Only one step, but enough to matter. I don't know what to do with all of this yet, she admitted. Your lies, your reasons, whatever this is becoming. You do not need to decide today. That, more than anything, undid the last of her defenses. Because everyone else in her life had always demanded immediate surrender, obedience, performance, gratitude, usefulness. And here he was, the most controlling man she had ever met in some ways, offering her time, space, choice. Claire exhaled slowly. Good, she said. Because I'm still angry. Elijah nodded once. You should be. A quiet smile finally touched her mouth. Small, reluctant, real. For the first time since she had been humiliated at the altar, her heart did not feel like a battlefield owned entirely by pain. Not healed, not safe, but no longer empty. Outside the windows, afternoon light stretched gold across the city. Inside the boardroom, amid the ruins of betrayal and the evidence of justice, Claire looked at the man she had married by force, and understood something that frightened her, more than scandal ever had. She had not just survived the wreckage. Somewhere within it, against all logic, she had become visible to someone capable of seeing her fully. And Elijah Kensington, the man who had hidden behind steel, silence, and a wheelchair, had finally stepped out from behind all of it, not only on his own 2 feet, but with his heart in his hands. In the weeks that followed the boardroom collapse, the Kensington estate changed in ways that were subtle at first and then impossible to ignore. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt like a threat waiting behind closed doors. It felt like a house exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Internal investigations spread through Kensington Holdings with ruthless precision. Darius Vance was formally charged with financial crimes, conspiracy, and corporate fraud. The board members, who had rushed to support him, began issuing statements full of selective memory and cowardly regret. Aunt Sarah withdrew from public affairs under the excuse of health concerns, though everyone who mattered knew it was shame, not illness, that had driven her into seclusion. As for Robert, his business dealings unraveled so quickly, it was almost humiliating to watch. Hidden accounts were frozen, property claims were contested. Former allies stopped answering his calls. Kevin's name became attached to scandal instead of influence. And Zoe discovered, too late, that the kind of men who applaud a woman for helping destroy another will one day enjoy watching her fall too. Justice did not arrive all at once, but it arrived, and for once, Claire did not have to beg for it. That was the strangest part. No pleading, no humiliation, no bargaining away pieces of herself just to be heard. Truth had simply been brought into the light, and one by one the people who had hidden behind reputation and performance had begun to wither under it. Yet, while the world outside shifted with scandal, headlines, and consequences, the harder work began inside the Kensington home. Healing was quieter than revenge, less dramatic, and far more difficult. Because justice could punish the guilty, but it could not teach a wounded heart how to rest. One evening, nearly a month after the board meeting, Claire stood barefoot on the terrace outside her private sitting room, watching dusk settle over the jacaranda trees. The sky was streaked with orange, violet, and fading gold. Below, the estate staff moved through their final tasks of the day, with an ease she had not seen when she first arrived. The fear had not vanished completely, but something softer had begun to grow in its place. Trust, perhaps, or the first roots of it. Behind her, the terrace doors opened. Claire did not turn immediately. She knew Elijah's footsteps now, not because they were loud, but because she had learned the rhythm of his presence. Measured, controlled. And yet, when he came to stand beside her, there was a new looseness in him. Not carelessness, he would never be careless, but less armor, less calculation in the spaces between his breaths. The lawyers finalized the last filings, he said. Robert won't recover from them. Claire nodded once. And Kevin? Elijah glanced at her profile. He has been abandoned by the same people he thought would reward him. She let out a slow breath. That sounds fitting. It does. For a moment they stood in silence. The wind moved lightly through the trees. From somewhere deeper in the garden came the sound of laughter, one of the maids speaking with the groundskeeper, unguarded and warm. Claire smiled faintly at the sound. Then Elijah said, "Your mother sent another message." The smile vanished. Claire's shoulders stiffened before she could stop them. What did she want? To see you. Claire looked out toward the fading horizon. Did she say why? No. That no contained no pressure, no manipulation. Just information. He had become careful with her in that way. Careful not to decide her feelings for her. Careful not to pull where he once would have strategized. It mattered more than she could explain. I'm not ready, she said. I know. She turned then, studying him in the fading light. You always say things like that now. He lifted one brow slightly. Like what? Like, I know. You do not need to decide today. Stay if you wish. Leave if you wish. You are not always so generous with freedom. Something almost like embarrassment crossed his face. Brief, disciplined, but real. I am learning, he said. Claire's gaze softened. Yes, she replied. You are, and that perhaps was the deepest miracle of all. Not that he had protected her, not that he had exposed the guilty, not even that he had chosen her, long before she understood why. It was this. Elijah Kensington, a man who had survived by controlling every variable around him, was learning how to love without turning love into strategy. It did not come naturally to him, but it came sincerely. That made all the difference. A few days later, Claire made a decision of her own. She asked Leo to arrange a drive. Not to a club, not to a society lunch, not to any of the polished spaces where women like Zoe once performed superiority in silken smiles. She asked to go to the community clinic near her old neighborhood. When the car stopped outside the modest building, memory hit her like heat off old stone. The cracked pavement, the faded wall paint, the fruit cellar across the road, the young mother near the gate, balancing a sleepy child on her hip. This place had known her before scandal ever touched her name. Inside, the nurses recognized her at once. Not as Mrs. Kensington, not as the abandoned bride, simply as Claire. One older nurse took both her hands and said, "You came back." The words almost undid her, because they held no accusation, no gossip, just simple welcome. Claire spent the afternoon there, quietly moving through rooms she had once visited in anonymity. She helped sort medicine donations, listened to a grandmother explain the cost of transport for her grandson's treatment, and sat with two young girls doing homework in the corridor while their mother saw a doctor. No cameras, no applause, no one trying to turn her kindness into currency. When she stepped outside near sunset, Elijah was waiting by the car. He had not entered, he had not hovered, he had simply come. Claire looked at him, startled. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough. You could have sent someone." "Yes," she smiled despite herself. "But you came." "Yes." Always those simple answers. And somehow they had become enough. She walked toward him slowly. "I used to think being seen by powerful people meant safety," she said. "Then I learned it can also mean becoming useful." Elijah listened without interrupting. "But here," she continued, glancing back at the clinic doors, "I remembered who I was before all of that. Before Kevin. Before my family turned everything into a transaction. Before I started wondering whether love always comes with hidden terms." Elijah's expression changed at that. Something deep, something careful. When he spoke, his voice was low. "It should not." Claire held his gaze. "No," she said. "It should not." The space between them seemed to narrow. Not because he moved, but because something inside her finally did. Not all at once, not in some dramatic rush that erased the pain before it, but in a quieter way. A truer one. She stepped closer. "Elijah," she said, and his name no longer felt like a question in her mouth. "I cannot promise I am healed. I would not ask that. I still remember every lie. You should. I still get angry. You should." The faintest ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You really are terrible at saying convenient things." "I have been told." The evening light softened the lines of his face, and for the first time since the day she met him, Claire saw not the CEO, not the strategist, not the man who once hid behind a wheelchair and war plans, but simply Elijah. A man who had been hurt in different ways, a man who had made grave mistakes, a man who was trying every day now to choose truth, not because it was useful, but because she deserved it. That mattered more than charm, more than grand promises, more than perfect words. So Claire reached for his hand. Not by accident, not in passing, deliberately. His fingers closed around hers at once, warm, steady, reverent in a way that almost broke her. "I cannot give you blind trust," she said softly. "I do not want blind trust." She nodded. "Then I will give you something else." His eyes held hers. "What?" "A real chance." For a moment, Elijah said nothing. And that silence from him was no longer cold. It was full. Then he lifted her hand gently and pressed it against his chest. His heartbeat was strong beneath her palm, unhidden. "No one has ever given me something more dangerous," he said. Claire felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes, not from sorrow this time, but from the terrifying tenderness of being met honestly after so much deception. She stepped closer still and rested her forehead lightly against his. The city hummed in the distance. The clinic lights glowed behind them. Life went on, and in that ordinary, sacred pause, two wounded people made a choice more powerful than revenge, not merely to stay, but to build. Months later, when the first jacaranda blossoms of a new season scattered across the estate grounds, the Kensington home no longer felt like a monument to silence. It felt lived in, warm in new places, open in ways it had never been. Claire had begun overseeing a foundation partnership between Kensington Holdings and several community clinics, making sure money flowed where it had once been withheld. Elijah no longer made decisions behind walls unless necessity demanded it. Leo smiled more. Even the household staff laughed openly now. And sometimes, in the evenings, Claire would look across the room and catch Elijah watching her with that quiet, unguarded love that needed no performance, no spectacle, no transaction. Just devotion. The kind that does not rush to possess, but stays to protect, to listen, to repair. The kind she had once believed did not exist for women like her. She had been betrayed at an altar, traded into a marriage she never chose, pulled into a house full of secrets. And yet, beyond humiliation, beyond lies, beyond the cruelty of those who called themselves family, she found something stronger than the life they tried to force on her. She found justice, she found truth, she found herself. And in the arms of the man the world had misunderstood, she found a love vast enough not to erase her scars, but to honor every one of them.
Some betrayals do not break you because you are weak. They break you because you loved honestly in a world that rewards deception. But honesty is not foolishness, kindness is not failure, and being wounded by cruel people does not mean you were wrong to have a clean heart. Claire's story reminds us that not every rescue looks gentle, and not every truth arrives softly. Sometimes healing begins only after every false thing collapses. Sometimes justice takes time because it must drag hidden rot into the light before peace can truly begin. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: love is not proven by control, convenience, or public performance. Real love protects your dignity. Real love leaves room for your voice. Real love does not demand that you betray yourself in order to keep it. The people who used Claire treated her pain like a tool. Elijah, flawed as he was, eventually learned to treat her heart like something sacred. That is the difference between possession and devotion, between survival and healing. So if life has ever humiliated you, abandoned you, or made you question your worth, remember this: the cruelty of others does not define your value. Truth may be delayed. Justice may come slowly, but a sincere heart tested by fire can still build a beautiful future. If this story moves you, tell me in the comments what part touched you the most and what you would have done if you were Claire. And don't forget to share your country and local time so I can see where you're watching from. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with betrayal, justice, healing, and powerful love, subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next one. Wow. Just wow. I'm gonna need a minute to process that one. I'm so curious, where are you guys watching from right now? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. I love seeing how this community stretches all across the globe. And more importantly, how did this story make you feel? I'd love to hear your honest thoughts. On a serious note, in this crazy world, I just want to send so much love and hope that you and your families are all safe and doing okay. Please take care of yourselves and each other. And hey, if you have an unbelievable, wild, or just truly heartwarming story of your own that you think needs to be heard, please share it in the comments. I read them, and you guys always have the most incredible experiences. If you enjoyed hanging out and listening today, a quick like and a subscribe would mean the world. It truly helps us keep these stories coming.
All right, everyone. Be good to each other. We'll see you in the next one.